Clean Transport Group. Our mission is to decarbonize transport in Europe and to achieve a zero-emission mobility system that is affordable and has minimum impact on our health and climate. We have offices in 6 countries, including Brussels, where I am today, and more than 60 members across Europe. Now, let's have a quick look at the agenda. So, if we can put the next slide, please. After this introduction, Johan, our lead analyst and author of the report, will present the roadmap. Following that, I will present policy recommendations. And finally, we'll have a Q&A session where our colleague Clara Ouvrier will be moderating. So please do share your questions in the Q&A box. We will monitor the questions there in the comments, but also on LinkedIn, where we are streaming live. So before we dive into the findings, I want to make 2 introductory comments to set the stage. First of all, why does this matter today? So today we are here to tackle one of the most pressing issues, that is reducing carbon emissions from the car sector. Emissions from the car sector have increased by 16% since 1990. That is over about bit more than 30 years. In the next 26 years, we need to get these emissions to zero. Moreover, transport is the only sector where emissions are increasing despite the climate crisis. So the challenge is huge, and we need a comprehensive strategy to achieve it. Secondly, why is this relevant now? Last year, the EU formally approved the 100% zero-emission car target for 2035. And last month, the European Commission presented its assessment for setting a climate target in 2040. So this brings a new focus looking at the legacy combustion car fleet, meaning looking beyond just the sales of new cars, because this legacy or existing car fleet will continue to emit on the road well beyond 2035. So offering a pathway to address this and to do this in a socially just way has guided the work that we present here today in this roadmap. So to finish, I would like to express big thanks to all the colleagues involved in this work, and in particular to Johan. So without further ado, I hand over to Johan to present our car decarbonization roadmap, and I wish you all a very good webinar. Johan, over to you.
Thank you, Lucien, and welcome everyone. I'm going to present the main finding of this new study, and let me start with some context. On this graph, you can see the CO2 emission from all the cars in the road in Europe and the projection up to 2050. Here, it's only tailpipe emissions. So you can see the savings from the 2023 car CO2 standards. You can see that thanks to the phase out of all petrol and diesel car by 2035 for new sales, this regulation will unlock significant emission reduction. For example, minus 57% in 2040 or 82% in 2050. So this regulation is really the single most important emission reduction measures that we have, and it's a key regulation. However, the EU will need more ambition in the car sector. Indeed, we have different climate targets. For example, in 2030, there is the effort sharing regulation target that set minus 40% emission reduction. Then we have the new 2040 ambition. Recently, the European Commission released its impact assessment for the 2040 ambition, and they mentioned a 90% emission reduction for the whole economy. They also mentioned a specific trend for road transport, where it would be minus 86%. And then we also have the net zero emission target in 2050. So you can see on this graph that we have significant large gap between the regulation scenario and this climate target. This means that additional measures are needed. And these measures are also needed to phase out all the remaining petrol and diesel cars on the road. Indeed, we calculated that even with the ICE phase out in 2035 and the natural turnover of cars in the fleet, there would be still 73 million petrol and diesel cars on the road in 2050. So that's a problem. That's why we designed this new roadmap. What we want is to combine clean solutions in order to meet those climate targets and decarbonize all the cars on the road. We have different steps in this roadmap. The first step is to accelerate the electric car uptake, mainly thanks to corporate cars. Then we want to convert all combustion cars to electric. That's a new solution called e-retrofitting that could be on the market after 2030 or 2035, and that will progressively ramp up. Then we have another solution, which is a scrappage of old combustion car and replace them by electric cars. And finally, we have a fourth package of measures, which would be meant to avoid growth in car activity. I'm going to present these four main solutions in the next slide, but I really want to highlight that this roadmap is designed to secure climate target, but also to provide clean and affordable solution to help all drivers make the transition away from polluting cars. Okay, here is the first solution with the acceleration of the EV uptake in corporate fleets. So corporate cars are cars that are bought by companies. They can be used in companies' fleet, or they can be leased to private consumers. On this graph, you can see the regulation scenario, which is the minimum electric car share of sales to meet the regulation. So what we want is to increase this EV uptake, and for this, we want to propose 100% BEV sales in corporate fleets by 2030. That's the light green curve. This would accelerate EV uptake, and you can see the resulting for the whole sales, including private cars, in dark green here. And that's really important because corporate cars make up more than half of new car sales in the EU, and they drive about 2 times more than private cars. So decarbonizing these cars would bring additional CO2 savings. Okay, that's the first levers. Then we have another package of measures to phase out all remaining petrol and diesel cars by 2050. And our focus is to provide clean solution for all, including drivers who still need a car. So we need different alternatives that can be adapted for all the different cases. Here we study 5 main options. The first would be an option with a scrappage scheme, and the driver would give up car ownership. So he could opt, for example, to public transport, bike leasing, and electric car sharing. The other option would be the scrappage scheme, where the driver would buy a new electric car. In this case, on top of this, we can propose some social measures, for example, social leasing, which is the leasing of an electric car for less than 100 euros per month. Another solution would be a scrappage scheme with a second-hand electric car. In this case, it's a more affordable solution for low-income households. Another solution is the e-retrofit, the conversion of the old car to electric. And we think that it can become an affordable solution in the future, mainly after 2030, when battery price will be lower. And this can be also supported by subsidies for low-income households. The last option is e-petrol. This synthetic fuel can be produced from hydrogen and carbon, for example, CO2 captured from the air. It's a solution mainly pushed by the fuel industry. So we wanted to compare these 5 solutions to define which are the most relevant. So we ranked them according to 6 criteria. The first 3 criteria are more quantitative. So we calculated the total cost of ownership, the TCO, that's the total cost for the driver. And you can see here that using a second-hand electric car or retrofitting the car would be much cheaper. On the other hand, using e-petrol, which is expected to be quite expensive in the future due to high demand for this fuel, would be the most expensive solution. Then we have a second criteria, which is the life cycle emissions. So that's all emissions in the lifetime of a car, including its production. Obviously, if we don't have to produce a car and the driver opt for a mobility package, that's where we would have the lowest CO2. On the other hand, if the driver opt for e-petrol, that's where it would emit the most CO2. Indeed, e-petrol is not necessarily a carbon neutral fuel. It needs to meet the Renewable Energy Directive that only set a 70% emission reduction compared to fossil fuel. That's why it's not purely carbon neutral. Then we have the air pollution. So if someone only uses public transport, they would emit less. And on the other hand, if someone keep its combustion car and just change the fuel, it would not really cut the pollutant emissions, for example, NOx emissions. Then we have 3 qualitative criteria. First, what would be the change in the user experience? So if someone has to give up car ownership and opt only for public transport, it might require more effort. It might be more difficult. So that's why it's negative here. On the other hand, the positive aspects are when someone buy a new car or just change the fuel for their car, it's not really difficult. Then we have the scalability and competing use. I will just take the example of e-petrol. So if you want to ramp up the production of a new fuel that would also require hydrogen to be produced, there might be a lot of difficulty to scale this solution and a lot of competing use. Indeed, hydrogen and synthetic fuel in general are needed in many sectors, for example, in aviation or shipping. So we don't think a lot of these fuels might be available for cars. And then we also looked at resource, and here the problem is for the scrappage scheme where we produce new car. Indeed, new car would require more resource, for example, raw material for batteries. All in all, we calculated an average scores from these 6 criteria, and we can see that scrappage scheme and retrofits are either positive or neutral, so they are the most appropriate solution. However, e-fuel is the only negative solution, and that's why we don't consider it as a credible solution to decarbonize cars. Okay, that were the solution to phase out all remaining combustion car on the road. The next package of measures is meant to avoid an increase in car activity. On this graph, you can see the passenger activity. That's all the total number of kilometers driven in Europe. So you can see that this activity increased by 17% since 2000. So that's a problem because if the car activity increase, it can offset improvement in car efficiency. And so that's mainly why we didn't manage to decrease emissions in the car sector. The problem now is that the European Commission expects that passenger activity continue to grow by 20% by 2050. So that's really a problem because it could still offset a lot of other measures. So it would be ideal if we could prevent this growth in car activity and have additional measures for this. So I've listed on this slide different measures that can be taken. So first, we can avoid the construction of new roads. Indeed, new road would induce more traffic. That's a problem. Then we would need some new measures at city levels, for example, more modal shift to active travel, as well as public and shared transport. We could then also implement some zero and low emission zone in city. And for all kilometers that are driven outside of city and longer distance, we would propose a shift to rail. Then we also took into account some behavior change, for example, the recent trends of teleworking, but also future trends where people will drive less because of a higher fuel price. Indeed, the EU emission trading system, the ETS2, is expected to increase the fuel price in the coming year. We also have other type of measures, for example, an increase in car occupancy, with, for instance, the development of carpooling and measures to reduce fuel consumption. For example, by limiting the new sales of petrol SUV before 2035. Okay, that were all the measures to avoid an increase in car activity. All in all, we can look at where we go in 2040. So you can see in this graph that the CO2 standards is the most impactful measures, but the 4 other package of measures that we presented are quite important if we want to reach 86% emission reduction in 2040. This 86% is the target from the European Commission impact assessment for road transport. On their side, the European Commission mostly rely on expensive combustion car-based solution. For example, higher fuel price due to the ETS2 and higher fuel price due to the use of e-fuel. This means that their scenario is mostly based on higher cost of mobility, and that's a problem for low-income households who still need a car. That's why our roadmap shows that we can reach the same level of ambition while ensuring a socially just transition. We think that's really important. So I think that's it for the presentation of the roadmap. Now I will hand over to Lucien, who is going to present our policy recommendation. Lucien, over to you.
Thank you very much, Johan. So Johan has shown that ambitious CO2 targets for cars in the EU are feasible, and this can also be achieved ensuring a just transition. But what's important is that this requires a comprehensive strategy and framework supported by policy measures. So this is what I want to focus on here. I will present 4 measures that are needed to achieve a successful and just transition. The first one, and it was mentioned already, is maintaining the 2035 100% zero-emission car sales target. This is absolutely fundamental. Backtracking from this target would not only make car decarbonization unfeasible by 2050, but it would also threaten European competitiveness and investment. So this target is central for regulatory stability, investment stability, etc. Second point is the acceleration of electric cars beyond the minimum CO2 targets by focusing on corporate car sales. So interestingly, the EU is actually currently considering a regulation to green corporate car fleets. We at TNE call for 100% of new corporate cars in big fleets and the leasing sector to be zero emissions by 2030. And also with an intermediate target of 50% in 2027. This is feasible and also a very effective measures as shown in our analysis. It is socially just as it makes big companies lead the transition while increasing the supply of affordable second-hand electric cars on the second-hand market. Third priority for recommendations here is that we need a European framework, also at national and local level, to support the shift from the aging ICE combustion car fleet to electric cars, and to do this while focusing on low-income categories, which are the most vulnerable in this transition. So instead of focusing on combustion car-based solutions like e-fuels or high carbon prices, as the European Commission is currently considering in their 2040 assessment. So instead of this, we believe the focus should be placed on providing clean and affordable solutions for all drivers. And these solutions rely mostly on scrappage schemes and e-retrofits, as described previously by Johan. So to incentivize the scrappage of the oldest ICEs, we suggest to implement some kind of sales, circulation, or export restrictions on used ICEs after a certain point. On retrofits, what is most important is that we need the European Commission to propose a European framework for the type approval of these vehicles, because currently it is difficult to get them regulated for the road. And this will be very important in order to allow for the value chain and businesses to develop. Finally, number 4 is on car activity growth. What we found with this work, very interestingly, is that we simply cannot reach our climate targets if we continue to increase car traffic as most of the projections foresee. So avoiding any kind of further increase in overall car activity is important, but it will require a rethink of our approach to mobility, and also, of course, needs to be backed by effective and concrete solutions and measures. And these include, for example, restricting new road building or any kind of car infrastructure, but also deploying, investing in public transport, bike infrastructure, rail, in order to increase modal shift away from cars and towards lower carbon transport modes. And finally, also increasing car occupancy and reversing the SUV trends also plays a crucial role in achieving our climate goals. Now, this is for, let's say, our recommendations. I just want to say a few words of conclusions before we go to the Q&A session. So in order to just take a moment to reflect on what we think are very important takeaways from this work. So as I said in introduction, the challenge we face is monumental, but with this roadmap, there is a clear path forward. And this is mostly thanks to electric cars, which are rapidly maturing and reaching price parity with their combustion car equivalents. So ultimately, a full electric car system will be far superior than its fossil-based equivalent. But it also means that stakeholders should be focused on actions to make the transition a success. That means new social and industrial policies and investment plans are required to make this a success. On the other hand, contesting the 2035 date or discussing e-fuels in cars is at best a distraction, or at worst, a dangerous attempt to derail the transition to electric cars and therefore our climate targets. So I hope that you found the study and the findings insightful, and that, just like us, you've learned a lot about the future of cars in Europe. Now it's over to you, the audience, to join the conversation. We have many questions coming in the Q&A box. Thank you for those. And without further delay, let's open the floor for those questions. So Clara, over to you. Do you have any interesting questions in the Q&A chat in store for us?
Thank you, Lucien. Thank you, Johan. Yes, we do have many questions, and we'll start with a question for Johan, I believe. One of the attendees is asking if we are really sure that battery electric vehicles will reduce overall emission, taking into account that the gain from BEV, when considering the full life cycle, is about 20% lower than ICE, due to a much larger footprint that comes from manufacturing. And this is without accounting for other side effects. So should it really be the main solution for sustainable mobility?
Thank you. Very interesting question. So we have looked a lot about life cycle emissions in other reports. So we have an online tool about this on our website. And so the first thing that we need to keep in mind is that the world economy need to go to zero emission in 2050. It means that all sectors will also find ways to decarbonize, for example, their production. We can think about green steels for the production of cars. And in terms of emissions for electric cars, most of the emissions come from the battery. And here there is also different ways to reduce emissions. First would be obviously to have a smaller battery. What we propose as TNE is to limit the battery size, for example, targeting a battery size of 50 kWh in 2040, instead of the current trend that is growing above 70 kWh. We think that it would be possible in the future when the charging infrastructure will be more developed. There will be also some improvement in the battery technologies with new type of chemistries that might be more optimized and provide more energy with less material. We can also have different way to decrease the emissions, for example, thanks to recycling. So all in all, we think that there are technical solutions that can be used to decrease the life cycle emission of cars, and it's possible to lead the world economy to zero in 2050. Yeah, I think that's it for this question.
Thank you, Johan. We'll now go to a question to Lucien. The question is, how should we proceed to make EVs affordable and frugal with a small onboard battery and multi-purpose? And what about modular batteries on demand?
Thank you very much for this question. It's a very important question because what we see today as the main barrier for EV adoption is indeed affordability, that meaning the upfront price of electric cars, which today is still higher than ICEs, although they are rapidly converging. So when we observe the markets, we see that car makers are actually prioritizing the sales of larger, more expensive electric cars, despite that there's a majority of buyers going for small and compact cars, and that there's high demand for small electric cars. We've done a survey a couple of months ago showing that more than 20% of European car drivers that want to buy a car would be interested in an affordable small electric car. So this is very relevant, and this mismatch is very clear when we look and compare the sales of cars in the combustion car versus electric cars. So for combustion cars, there's 2 times more sales on the compact segment compared to when we look at electric cars, where there's much less of these models. And this is because car makers are holding back the sales of smaller and more affordable electric cars. So, but there is hope, I would say, because car makers are now planning to launch a dozen of new electric car models which are affordable, so meaning under 25,000 euros over the next couple of years. But what is not clear is the scale at which they will deliver these vehicles. So we think and call for governments to also put in place measures and policies in order to incentivize these smaller electric cars, but also in order, going back more to the really focusing on the affordability, governments also need to support the most vulnerable in this transition. So, for example, an interesting measure that we like is the French social leasing scheme. So the scheme allows low-income drivers, which are car dependent, to lease an electric car for 100 euro per month. And we think this is a very interesting approach to address some of the social barriers, but also encourage, as the question was highlighting, EVs which are more affordable and more rightly sized.
Thank you, Lucien, for taking this question. Over to Johan, a question on car share schemes. Did you consider car share schemes using BEVs in your study instead of private car ownership?
Indeed, that's a very good question. So we indeed considered car sharing. So it's, for example, it could be part of the scrappage scheme. So you can scrap a car and go to a mobility package where car sharing could be included. We also looked at the impact of car sharing on new sales. So, for example, if a car is shared by 2 persons, it will reduce the need of producing new cars, and it will decrease also the need for raw material and batteries. So we think that's a very good complementary solution, and it should be incentivized. And yeah, it has many benefits to reduce emissions.
Thanks, Johan. Then we have another more political question for Lucien. Do you see the ICE ban by 2035 threatened in the next legislature? And second part of the question, relating to the EPP strategy, is that more a CDU-CSU political strategy to gain votes, or do you think they will scrap the ICE ban?
Thank you. It's a very very important question, and I know at least in Brussels, a lot of stakeholders are asking themselves that question. So what we think about 2035 and maybe what will happen, although of course we don't have a crystal ball. Broadly speaking, we think this ICE phase out in 2035 that is set. And as we show with this report, and I've highlighted in the conclusion, contesting that decision is not the right approach. It's not strategic. It won't benefit consumers, investments, companies, etc. So if there is a review, I think it will probably focus on things like enabling conditions, like charging or raw material supply, So we don't expect a significant review. And actually, when we look at just recently, the EPP party had, let's say, as a priority, the reverse or the removal of the ICE phase-out in their manifesto, but that has been dropped recently from their manifesto. And I think this is a good indication that there is desire from companies for regulatory stability and investment certainty in order, I mean, instead of reopening, let's say, this lengthy discussion, which ultimately would not benefit us as Europeans.
Thank you. Then next question regarding e-retrofits. How do you rate the national initiatives, such as this one seen in France or Belgium, setting up a framework for this retrofit? Can the EU learn from it?
Indeed. So I can talk a bit about the French framework, which is a good example. So it defines different rules to type approve e-retrofit cars, including some tests that would ensure the safety of those cars. So I think that's really the type of frameworks that would be needed at EU level, so that every national member has this opportunity to type approve these vehicles. I think there was also a question about the cost projection for e-retrofit. So we have information on our report about this. So what we have in mind is that this sector will mainly ramp up after 2030, when the battery price will be lower, and there could be some subsidies for low-income households. For example, today there is a 5,000 euro subsidy in France. So if we have the same amount of subsidy in the future, we estimated that in 2035, the conversion for the very smallest cars, the cheapest one, could be about less than 5,000, so approximately 4,500. So it could really be an affordable solution.
Thanks, Johan. We have another question that is probably for you. It says, currently we have over 250 million cars in the EU. How does the total number of cars in the EU develop in your scenario? For instance, by how much does this number come down?
Indeed. So thanks to our different measures to decrease or at least prevent the growth in car activity and the increase in car occupancy, we would see indeed a small decrease in the total number of car fleet in Europe, so to about 200 million. With a progressive ramp up of electric cars, additional cars would also be produced with the scrappage schemes, and some old IC would be converted to electric with a retrofit. So at the same time, we have the increase of the EV uptake, so a decrease of the IC in the fleet, and a decrease in the total number of cars to 200 million cars.
Thank you. Perhaps now a question more to Lucien regarding smaller vehicles. So EV sales are dominated by larger vehicles, which have other social costs. So how does TNE propose to encourage smaller vehicles?
Thank you, Clara. Again, I think an important question. It links a bit to the question of affordability that I answered earlier, but maybe specifically on the size of the vehicles. How can we encourage this? Of course, if we look at market trends, this has not been progressing in the right direction, as if kind of the market and car makers only know one direction, which is bigger and heavier. So there is a need, from affordability, sustainability, and acceptability perspective to encourage these smaller cars. And there's a number of measures that decision makers at all the different levels, EU, national, and local level, can encourage. So maybe we can start with the national level, for example, something very effective that any country could do today or next year is setting a tax, for example, on the weight. So a few European countries are doing this already, like France, for example. And we know that there's a certain number of other governments and capitals that are also seriously considering this. So this is quite simple. For example, in France, it's vehicles above a certain weight pay an extra tax, and this discourages the purchase of the heaviest vehicles. And there is a way to include EVs in this scheme while accounting for a weight allowance of, let's say, for example, 300 kilograms to account for the heavier battery. So that's national level. At city level, we also have an interesting example in France, what Paris is doing. Following a recent referendum, the city has decided to set a tax on the parking for the heaviest vehicles. So heavy SUVs will pay 3 times more for their parking fee. This is also a very clear signal that cities can look at today. So differentiating parking charges. Maybe finally, also for the EU level, there's a number of things that can be done there. We have been advocating for a revision of the width limit of cars. Currently, cars can get as wide as trucks, and the width of cars has been increasing by 1 centimeter every 2 years. And that is consistent across the past decades. So if we don't do something, it will continue. So we're calling for a review of that limit. And also something that we're calling the next commission to look into is setting a sort of environmental score for electric cars in order to be able to rate and compare the environmental performance of electric cars by looking at things like the energy efficiency, the carbon footprint of the production. And this, of course, would also favor smaller cars. So I'll stop there. There's many more, but I think these are the most important ones.
Thank you, Lucien, for taking this question. Then we have another one for Johan again. Could you please explain which technical analysis was done on your side regarding the feasibility of retrofitting an ICE to a BEV?
Thank you. So on retrofit, we have commissioned a report to a company called Electrify, which is specialized in the retrofit topic. So this report is published on our website now. So you can find more information about all the details of e-retrofit and the different steps that would be required to convert a car. So there are indeed some technical challenges that could be solved with some investment in research and development, and ideally with cooperation between a retrofit company and car makers. So as we said, we really expect this industry to really ramp up mostly after 2030. For now, it's really the early phase, and we don't really see a lot of retrofitted cars on the road. So there are indeed some technical challenges to be solved. So we'll see how it goes in the future, but we are quite optimistic about it. If the right conditions are met, mainly regarding the type approval framework with the right test to ensure safety, etc., and if there are investment in this area, it could be possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Johan. So I see it's 12:10, so we promised a short webinar of just 40 minutes. So short and sweet. We hope you enjoyed this format. So I want to express again big thanks to all the colleagues that contributed on this work, and also big thanks to you, the audience, for your many questions. Unfortunately, we're not able to answer them all, but I hope that we answered the most important ones. So thanks again for being here today and listening to this webinar, and we wish you all a very good day.